So when I discovered that only 2% of giving went to climate and environmental nonprofits and only 0.5% to environmental justice, I knew that was a gap that needed to be filled, and that's what ended up having us create Earth Gives. Hello, everyone. I am Rhonda Bannard. I'm the founder and executive director of Earth Gives, and we work to build a community of Earth givers all across the country and beyond. And we do hope that the nonprofits here joining us today consider registering. It's a great Friday afternoon task to add to your list. And I can give a shout out to Jack and Lou, who have both participated in the past. And they've got some great stories that came from participating in Earth Gives. And we hope to generate even more of those in the coming years. So it is about extending an invitation to individuals to pivot some of their money and their generosity to the work that you do, which is so critical. And so today's Community Commons Impact Makers is all about doing that, extending those asks, fueling the work, and nurturing people to do just that. And we have two wonderful experts in fundraising that are going to share with us, and they're two of our newest board members to Earth Give, so we're excited to have them. We're going to be talking about fundraising, but this is really about workshopping ideas with you. And so we're going to kick it off with Susan Swern, who will introduce herself, as will Renee. But this is really, but once Susan sort of opens it up, this is about opening it up to you and saying, what do you want to take away from today? What are you struggling with? What things do you need to learn? And so make sure you tell us a little bit about you, and that these two amazing people get to answer your questions directly. So thanks for being here. Susan, take it away.
Thank you, Rhonda. And I'm so happy that you asked Renee and myself as new board members to kind of ground this conversation. I see myself more as a facilitator. I'm not a guru, although I've been in this field for 40 years, directly in nonprofit fundraising. And the only hiatus I took was I needed a breather. So I started studying integrative nutrition and eating psychology. And as I was reflecting on what kind of where I'm at, because I have a full-time job, I'm what technically is called a major gifts officer. I made them change the name to philanthropic partnerships officer because it's not about the size of the gift. It's the kind of relationship and partnership that you're building with donors. So that really speaks to my orientation. I am completely donor-centered. As much as I'm mission-centered, I still am in awe of the level of philanthropy that exists in the United States, even now, even through the kind of turbulent, challenging times that we're in. And there was one concept from the psychology of eating that stayed with me is the fact that we have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight response mechanism, that when we're threatened, like if you think of cave person days, if we're threatened by this large behemoth coming after us, we are either going to flee, we're frightened, so we're either going to fight, freeze, or what's the third one? Flee, right. So I think what I know in these times, given what's happening with this administration, given the direct impacts of U.S. aid funding being decimated, the jobs that are being decimated, I wanted to check in with everybody. And if you don't want to be honest with me, at least maybe write it down. So on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the most positive and 1 being the most negative, when you think about your life, generally speaking, not just in your roles or in fundraising, how are you feeling right now? And then in the chat, write what that number is. I'd be curious. But if you want to do it anonymously, that's fine too. I'm just really curious where people are. So 1 being the least, the most mega negative, 5 being the most positive or optimistic or feeling good about this moment right now.
About ourselves or about the world situation?
However you want to define it. I would say right now, it's all about you. It's not about the world situation right now. We're trying to dive into our being in this context. So I see 4, 3, 3, 3, a 2. Okay.
0.5.
Stephanie's a 4.5. Okay, great.
Math
And so,
background, sorry.
no, this is your lives, you know.
Can't quite say 5.
So clearly there are common, 3s to 4s and 2s. So, we're not that many people are at a real true 5 or a real true 1, which is kind of typical. So if we were to shift the question to on a scale of 1 to 5 using the same parameters, how are you feeling in this moment and the year ahead around fundraising, your professional or volunteer role, if you're a board member on this? How are you feeling about fundraising specifically and the impact it's having on you personally and professionally, as well as your organization? I'm curious whether it's pretty similar or different. Steve is 1, Brooke 2, Stephanie 3, Lou, okay? Yeah, okay. Again, not surprised at that. And therein lies, I think, where this moment and this kind of group can really help. So when I thought about, well, what did we want to cover? And we were talking, Rhonda and Renee and I'm like, I think we need to focus on, at least my piece of it is on the self-care aspect of fundraising. Yes, there are skills. Yes, there's AI learning. Yes, there's strategies, but we thought beginning it on how we're feeling and what we're thinking and how it all impacts us is going to impact the success of whatever we're going to be doing in our fundraising capacities. And having been in this field for almost 40 years, I mean, I'm a dodo bird. Most people get out of this field. And so clearly I've developed both a love and coping skills. But I wanted to go online. So I did a search both on ChatGPT and on just Google, where I said, what are the key coping mechanisms in turbulent times for fundraisers right now? So I put together a list. I can send it to Rhonda. This is just my notes. And the two things that were so consistent with us being in the environmental or the environmental justice end of philanthropy is in the world of nature, resilience, adaptation, and mitigation are very, very common words. So in this time, I'm thinking, how are we adapting in this moment within ourselves and in our organizations? How are we cultivating resilience? Because there's so many things out of our control. And then how are we mitigating these impacts that could have on us, that feeling burnt out, feeling pessimistic, feeling stressed, all the kind of negative feelings that we're feeling. And how do we shift those? So the full list, as you all probably have known, in the Environmental Working Group has the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And I love that. I refer back to that all the time because I can't buy organic all the time. I mean, I can, but there's some things you don't have to. So I came up with the top 12, and I'm not going to go into details, but what I would love you to do is all of us have coping skills and how we cultivate resilience and how do we mitigate negative energy or not unpositive thinking or negative thinking. Write down the ones that are not your go-to. Which of the things that I'm going to go through, the 12, that you don't think you naturally rely on? That's neither good nor bad, but just something that would be new to you. So first one was, do not internalize failures. I don't view things as failures. I do the opportunities to learn. It's a failure if you don't learn from it. But that's number one. Don't internalize lack of success or the hard knocks. Second one was focus on progress, not perfection. How many of us are perfectionists and struggle with this? Yeah. So that is part of our work. Prioritizing self-care. Oftentimes people that are in the nonprofit world and in the environmental space, especially right now, since it's being so impacted by the current administration's policies as well as funding, how do we practice and prioritize our own self-care? Because it's sort of like a drowning person cannot save another drowning person. You do have to kind of put that mask on yourself in an airplane before you put it on the person next to you or the child. So the fourth one, celebrate the little things as much as the big ones. Sixth one is tap into a positive mindset or staying optimistic, even if at first it's acting as if. And I think you all probably know what that is. It's sort of fake it till you make it. It may not feel authentic, but sometimes your nervous system responds to whatever your brain is setting out. So if you can shift what you're thinking or doing into a more positive mindset, your body responds, and it decreases the stress that, all that cortisol, adrenaline rush. Show gratitude, not just to your donors, not to your staff, not to your board, but to yourself most of all. Because I think we're really hard on ourselves because we have metrics. We're a very metrics driven field. How much money did we raise? How many people did we talk to? How many cards did we get at a networking meeting? All of that stuff could feel very numerically driven. Setting realistic goals and boundaries. That's a big one for me because I think I have tended to be codependent with my identity as a fundraiser and where I work and the pride I feel because I don't have a partner and I don't have children. So I have my four-legged. And so to me, setting boundaries is a really big one. So I don't work 10 hours, 14 hours a day. If it gets really bad, seek professional help. There's so many resources out there, therapists, professional coaching, if it's not therapy that you're seeking. And then the other thing is during these times, oftentimes we have a high turnover in fundraising and fundraisers is because we don't really connect to the mission enough. And we don't reflect on what our personal values and how our current position is reflecting those values. And that you're not just raising money, you're building relationships and you're making change in the world. So how to reorient that from the kind of day-to-day, I have to raise all of this money this year or this month. And then leverage communities and professional networks, of which this is one. The Community Commons is a forum that we can do this in very, very transparently and hopefully honestly. And then there's professional associations, the Association for Fundraising Professionals, educational organizations have CASE, attending webinars, conferences, virtual meetups. And then share your challenges and solutions with your peers. We are not alone. I know oftentimes it feels like you're alone in your organization, especially if you're a one-stop shop. You're the executive director and you're the primary fundraiser, and you have to wear so many hats. So that was kind of my top 12 after I looked at everything that was out there that was not on strategy. It was all about how do we feel whole in this moment? How do we not get burnt out? How do we feel positive about this year as best as we can? So how has that landed with you? Anybody want to share like one of the ones that's not your natural bent and willing to share one that we could help you with, through these kind of chats or one-on-one? Or Rhonda is epitome. I mean, she's my go-to partner. When I have something, because we come from a very similar place, I'm working full time. I'm launching Pickleball for Good. I sit on the Earth Give board, and now I'm part of the Global Pickleball Federation. So I'm wearing a lot of hats, and yet I still stay sane in it because I do what I can. So Rhonda's one of my go-tos.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, when you read them, I think the one for me is setting boundaries and realistic goals. I was joking the other night about how I have too many tabs open. And that's the one that I failed to do. That's mine.
Lou?
There's a few others, but that's the big one.
Okay. And is that also representative in your personal life? Not to get personal, but I think we carry our true selves in our work. And so setting boundaries in my personal life can be like a caretaker kind of personality and want to jump in there, and everybody exposes their dark side, but sometimes that's a burden. So do you do it in both your professional life and your personal life?
Oh yeah, I think your characteristics are your characteristics. I had a startup business that I ran and just, it's an asset to just go and go in a startup business, but knowing how to turn that off was the challenge then. And I had to take a break after retiring and sell my business before I did this. And I thought, yeah, this time I won't. But no, I think it's embedded in my personality a lot. And it's something I'll always have to remind myself.
And it's also embedded in that we're remote workers. That was a big shift for me, that I don't have the distraction of being in an office with a lot of other people. So during COVID and during this remote work, I've had to shift. I think I've grown tremendously, but that's another way that how do I set boundaries that my computer is always here, my dog is here, my wanting to play pickleball is always here. So how do I set those boundaries? Did somebody else have their hand up?
Lou did.
Yeah, I did, but I just lowered it. So, yeah, mine was shared challenges and solutions with peers, just because I live in a very small rural community, and it's like everybody knows. I don't want everybody to be in our business, but here's the challenge that I've been given just in the last week. I have to fundraise. I have to launch a campaign to fundraise for an expense that's already been made. So it's like for paying ourselves back. So just to give a little background, our organization is called Sierra Forever. We're the official nonprofit partner of the Inyo National Forest and other forests, but in this case, it's the Inyo National Forest. There's a visitor center where we run a bookstore, where there was a power surge in January, and it burnt out the fire alarm system. And because it's a federal facility, you cannot open it to the public unless there's a working fire alarm system, which it was irreparable. It needed to be replaced. So the total cost was going to be $16,000, including the hardware, and then also the labor. But the way that everything's being restructured now, anything that's over $10,000 calls for a contract that has to go to Washington for approval. And this thing had to be opening and functional by May. So they got creative. They were able to, the Forest Service paid for the $6,000 that the alarm system cost. And then our organization stepped up and paid for the $8,000 that it cost to install it. So I've been tasked with fundraising for the $8,000 after the fact, which is kind of a challenge, but I've started finding that there's really good storytelling that I can do around this. The visitor center really serves a good purpose to the community. I mean, it's visited by about close to 120,000 people per season, which goes from May through mid-October. It's a stopping point on the way to places like Bodie State Park, which is an old mining ghost town. It's on the way to the eastern entrance to Yosemite National Park, Mammoth Lakes, and other communities, right? And then also it serves a lot of purposes to the community. I just found out just today that 2 high schools are going to be using that visitor center for their prom, because they need a facility, and these 2 high schools, which are about, 40 miles apart from one another, but have very small populations of students, it's easy to consolidate. So all of these, I'm finding some really wonderful storytelling, arguments to make for getting the money, paying ourselves back. But do you think that's, have you ever experienced that? I'd like to ask this question about doing a fundraising campaign after the money has been spent. I've never had to do that before. This is a first for me.
Susan, do you want to get everyone's questions and things that they're grappling with, and then let you and Renee just kind of jump in? And okay, that was a good one. That's a good one, Lou. Thank you. Also a board member for Earth Gives. Stephanie, what would you and Brooke answer today? What are you grappling with?
Oh man. Brooke, feel free to tap in.
And please introduce yourselves.
Yeah, so we're the Idaho Sustainability and Energy Coalition, and been self-funded for about 3-4 years, which means me, and with a little bit of partners that have contributed and been terrific, but mostly self-funded. So we're transitioning to an executive director as we we're awarded a good sized project that gives us the funding to go through for a good period of time. And so I think we're doing well with the transition, but I think this is a common time. Like, you have a chunk of money and you want to be sure that you utilize that well and springboard well, and you're shifting roles. So my question would be, what experiences have you seen around that transition? Yeah, the other might be different fundraising models, and maybe that one's too broad. Because one of the things that hit me is, if we're all tapping into similar things, are there other ways to do it? And I know how the way I'm aiming us right now, but I don't have any real experience. It comes from my experience running an engineering firm. Is I'm like, well, we'll fall back into kind of that mode and be a nonprofit engineering firm. But really, I don't know that I understand the different funding models well enough either. So maybe that's too broad of a question for today, but maybe the transition's a more important one. We'll just see where you get.
Can add too.
Yeah, Brooke.
Please.
So I've been in the nonprofit world for about 15 years, but it's been mostly community service industry, YMCAs, summer camps, working with youth development and family development. And so this world with Stephanie is a little new for me. It's a different type of nonprofit. And I think my struggle is trying to transition from a very community outward nonprofit to something that's more in the background. And so I don't really know how to switch gears and try to find ways to fundraise for something that's so different.
A great question. Thank you, Brooke.
Well, and Stephanie, I think there's one piece that maybe Susan and Renee are missing, is that with your expertise, you're like a professional to hire, where people, some of the funding comes in because they're hiring you to do research, science, energy-based research, correct?
Well, that's the project we're on right now, and we'd like to continue that because it is work we're familiar with and stuff, but we really will have two sides. I mean, Brooke, it's great. Brooke comes from that traditional nonprofit world. We don't want to we can't put all our eggs into one basket. So I feel like for us, if we chase both, let's do this technical, because sometimes it'll be there and sometimes it won't. But there is generally more funding there than asking donors for space, for funding. So it's my view is that let's find our way through this as an integration between those two kind of approaches. Because I think the world that everybody's in for traditional fundraising is getting harder, and it's a hard game.
Okay, why don't we take these two? Renee, why don't you kick us off with maybe some thoughts that you have on these two, and then we'll go to like Jack and Terry, and then Steve and Courtney with your questions and your challenges and what you'd like to get out of this.
Yeah, thank you. Just to introduce myself, I am Renee Myers. I am the executive director here in Portland, Oregon for Leach Botanical Garden, a really unique community garden. And I also am a development specialist and strategist for two BIPOC-led organizations, Love is King and Soul River Inc. So yeah, I've been doing I bet you fundraising is probably 80% of what I do, in building connections and community, trying to wrap my arms around both the fundraising piece and the communities that we're trying to serve. And I really appreciate you were saying how traditional, fundraising models, it's getting tougher and tougher to really bring money in the door, utilizing those, because there are so many nonprofits, there are so many amazing issues that need to be funded, but there's just not enough money to go around. And how do you, kind of be able to bring that money in the door and build community at the same time as, these resources just seem to be more limited every day. And so I think when you were talking about, don't get me wrong if I'm kind of wrong here, but the kind of fee for service earned revenue model, am I correct? That's kind of what you were getting at. That seems to be working well for you.
Well, so far. Yeah, we got one good sized project, and I'm used to consulting, so I feel like it's a good model, but I don't want to solely rely on that. And I think you can just end up too much in the technical too, where this is really about human beings and our behavior and how do we affect that, which is like, I may be that technical side, but Brooke is that human side. And, so yeah, it has been an effective model, but I don't want to focus there, not just for financial reasons, but also for mission reasons. I don't want to just focus there. You want to develop relationships. We don't want to rely on that funding, but we want to, it's just part of how you do work as a nonprofit too. You're building partnerships and relationships and yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, I think, especially these kind of times right now, you have to get really creative and start thinking outside the box. And I think there are a lot of nonprofits that don't really do fee for service or earned revenue, because it kind of takes on, kind of like a for-profit and nonprofit kind of model, right? But it's really great revenue and a great way to bring money in the door. And I think that it's something, at least here in Portland, I've seen more and more nonprofits kind of leaning towards, because we all have, an amazing, skill set that's very unique to each organization. So I think, how do you kind of leverage that and use that specialty to be able to bring earned revenue in the door? So I think, it's being creative and creating, different models like that. But I also think that, there's a lot to be said about collaborative fundraising, right? So we're all trying to dip, I think, lots of times into the same pot of funds. But what I found super successful is, a handful of partners, sometimes two or three, and collectively kind of wrapping our arms around each other in a larger project or an issue, and going out and applying for funding together and then sharing the pot. And I think I've also seen a lot of foundations, even corporate sponsors, um, really attracted to that, right? Because you've already built this partnership, and they're not just funding one organization or, kind of one piece of an issue, but they're actually funding multiple organizations that are being collaborative, and the impact that you're having in the end is so much greater. So I've really kind of tuned into that model and kind of moved most of our fundraising right now is collaborative fundraising, because I think it's really successful. And it's really increased our fundraising a lot. I would say probably by like 30 or 40% of revenue that's we've been able to bring in the door. So yeah, I think really being creative, and also, what are those, specialties within your organization as well, kind of thinking about, you know, fee for service, like even with different, programs that you have, that you can start generating revenue through that kind of fee for service model. So yeah, I don't want to totally like run the show, but that's kind of what I have for now, and can
Yeah, we
chime in
want to get
later.
to everyone. So any thoughts on the backfilling, that question that Lou Medina asked? Susan, Renee?
I was going to piggyback on what Renee said about this one, but if you want me to pivot, because we only have a half hour, I'm happy to do whatever you think is timely.
Well, go
Both.
for it.
Both. Okay. So a couple of things. As I love the idea of collaborative fundraising. We do that at Global Green Grants Fund. There's the Klima Fund, where a group of our allies, which included Thousand Currents, Grassroots International, and these are bigger organizations, and they're all intermediaries pretty much. And Urgent Action Fund and Global Green Grants Fund. And the ideal was that they would be the PR arm to talk about climate justice and be able to write grants that included all of our organizations for a bigger size grant that would be distributed equitably among the four groups. I think it's still successful, but there are also some other, I don't know if it's challenges because I'm not part of that team, but I think we were kind of analyzing what is this doing actually, not just for our bottom line, but building relationships, which kind of links me to what I'm hearing very much across the board is a scarcity mindset. That there's this mindset that there's not enough, that everybody's competing, that it's a limited pie. And I couldn't stay in this field if that was the place I came from. It might feel that way, but when you have a traditional fundraising organization, those donors that have given to you 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you can go back and ask them for anything. And that links to Lou's question. Because if you already have donors and you've cultivated the relationship in between your asks, they are your best friends. They should be championing your mission regardless of what you're raising money for. And the story isn't about fixing the alarm system. It's having people have access to the visitor center and do all the wonderful work that it is. So it isn't about a building. Same thing when you do capital campaigns. Capital campaigns, you're not building a building. You're building programmatic support, you're creating community. And so that's usually the narrative, is not so much the bricks and mortar, but what are you achieving by that building? So I really encourage everybody to not just think of fundraising from a monetary standpoint, because when you do that, you become transactional like a salesperson. And I'm not in sales. I'm in fundraising, and although there's sales principles, because my job is to ask and to answer questions and whatever. But the mindset of somebody giving out of a sponsorship or a fee for service is very different from a donor. And you have to appreciate those differences. They don't necessarily give because it's a tax deduction, but the fact that it's not a transactional, they don't have to give you. And when they choose to, that takes a bit more, because the only thing they're getting out of it is the goodwill, the fact that they feel like they're making a difference. And yes, if it's a large enough amount and it makes sense, then they get a tax, it's tax smart to give charitably. So I just wanted to share those couple of thoughts as a response to, your question.
Thank you.
And then as far as Lou, I think I kind of hit on it, is that I would just go back to the donors that you have as a starting point when you're crafting your message, and test it out with them, because they're the ones that know you the best, rather than going to new people and just explain the fact that the expense, people start building a building before they've raised all the money. So I don't think that should be like the centerpiece for what you're doing. You're basically restoring the visitor center to do what its mission is. And so I wouldn't carry that as an obstacle, because if you carry it as an obstacle, they might carry it as an obstacle. So I would just say we're trying to get the visitor center open and accessible, and we got to meet these requirements. But and if they're a technical person, they're going to want to know the technical. But if they're an emotional person like me, I don't care about the technical alarm system. I care that I can't go. I can't bring my grandkids or my kids. That kind of thing.
Okay.
So again, it goes back to mindset.
I want to make sure we get other people in here. So let's go to Terry and Steve to each share what they're struggling with, and then Courtney and Cameron, and then we'll just keep chatting. So Terry, what are you struggling with? Tell us about your organization. She might not be on. Okay, Steve. Steve.
Okay, it took me a while to unmute. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Basically, I'm just trying to be all ears. We're a nonprofit that's been around since 1970, but we, our near-death experience from COVID, we're coming back from four board members to now a dozen. And so we don't even have someone solely working on fundraising. It's all of us trying to do stuff. And our purpose is our mission is to educate, at the public and our member or environmental organizations about what's going on in the environment. So I'm stuck with how do you get funding when you're an environmental organization, and we're in Houston, where the environment is not prioritized, like, for instance, other wonderful areas like Portland. And, so the how do we even, get people to, write us a check or, get a grant for doing stuff when we hardly have anybody to work on it and all that kind of jazz. So at any rate, I'm not going to be very helpful with which of the 10 things, is confronting us the hardest or anything like that. So I'm just kind of listening, and that's kind of where my head's at.
I want to jump in here real quick. Steve and I, we just did a women's gathering right before this that Earth Gives also puts on, and it was amazing because it was don't talk about the oil and gas industry, talk about the energy industry. It's a business, and actually Texas is the largest, providers of solar and wind. So, I mean, it seems to me that there's something there to play on, like pound your chest and say, look at how we're driving the business and energy. Anyway, just a quick thought.
And I would add too is
Thank you.
if you look at that's a great comment, Rhonda. If you look at your existing donors, whether they're businesses, foundations, family foundations, or individuals, what we started implementing is a referral, I wouldn't say program, but everyone I talk to, if it's a donor who I'm in the middle of just updating or they're renewing their support or we have an urgent request, I ask them, is there one person that you could think of that you think would connect with our mission? Because you're just exploring, not that they have money, but they have passion. Because people too often, again, focus on the money. And yet, what if you have an employee who works for an energy organization? They don't make a ton, but they work for an organization that they could find out from their C-level people that are sympathetic and understanding of the environmental challenges that we are facing today. So that would be one strategy that I would employ, is seeing who they know. And then oftentimes you do a friend raiser event, not a fundraiser. Too often we think if we're going to gather people, whether it's, to see the office, whether it's a happy hour, whether it's, seeing a disaster or seeing a solar farm or whatever, don't ask for money there. Your whole goal is to get them excited about your mission first. You get everybody's email address and contact, and you say, may I reach out to you, within the next week or two so we can set up, because you leave so much money on the table when you do group things. If you can sit down one-on-one with somebody, you get to know them and what levers you need to focus on, because everybody's a different reason why they're engaged with environmental justice.
Thank you. Renee, quick thought.
Yeah, I think you both covered it really well. What I was going to say, I think, really connecting and trying to find as many people as you can that connect with your mission, right? And growing your friend base, because I think in the end that it will lead to, revenue coming in the door. But yeah, you can't do that unless you're
And
building those
everyone
connections.
impacted by the floods, the storms, the fires across Texas that have happened. You can talk about your own state, obviously. You've had some of the most devastating storms and fires. So that might be an
Sure enough.
opportunity. Yeah. Yeah, I was just with some of the people at a Giving Tuesday conference, and they're in the area where the fires impacted and wiped out thousands of cattle and all of that. And it's like, it was in the news and then it wasn't. It just like disappeared. And it's impacting people's livelihoods, right? And their homes and places they care about. So definitely tuning into that. Courtney and Cameron, what are you struggling with? Hi, Courtney. You took yourself off mute, but we can't hear you. Is your audio up? Nope. You want to sign off and try to sign back in? Okay. Well, let's go to Cameron. Cameron, what have you got struggling with? Yeah.
Okay. I guess it's a conglomeration of things, but also thank you to Lou for connecting me to this organization and this webinar.
Yeah.
So I'm the executive director of a small nonprofit based in the greater Death Valley area called Friends of the Amargosa Basin. We're literally in a town of like 15 people. And we're fairly new since 2020. I've been here for 2 years on the month. But we're just getting our infrastructure together somewhat, like that next level. We just added a new board member past our original 5. So it's kind of like taking those next steps to follow the baby steps that brought everything initially together. And now I'm trying to figure out kind of cultivating major donors on an individual level, but also helping the board figure that out with the consultant. We're fundraising. We just did an event in spring that was a good fundraiser, and you know, before any ask that we do, and then we did a spring appeal. But yeah, individually cultivating those major donors and you know, getting assistance for just the general operating sort of budget and those things that aren't really sexy that grants don't usually cover. And then at the same time, kind of balancing that with the programmatic side of things. I was just on a call where we're trying to get like 8 tribes together for a coalition, and now putting together a budget for that in addition to like our organizational budget. So just balancing all the things is kind of the struggle, I guess.
Before they answer, and I want to get Courtney to share hers, is what is the purpose of your organization? I guess I can't.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I did gloss over that. It's to protect the land, water, and beauty of what we call the Amargosa Basin between Death Valley and, if you're familiar with the Mojave National Preserve, on the way to Vegas. So that area kind of in between the 2 parks and the Nevada state line. And we're actively pursuing a national monument campaign.
Right. I'm
That's
sure that
public
will
land.
help. Yeah, with context. Courtney, let's see if second time works. No.
Maybe she can put it in the chat.
Yeah. Okay, you'll put it in the chat. So Renee and Susan, what thoughts do you have for Cameron?
Do you want to go first? Or you want me to?
Go for it.
Okay. So congratulations for drinking the Kool-Aid, as we say, and trying to start a smaller nonprofit and wearing multiple hats and guiding it. Cameron, the first thing that comes to me is, first of all, who are the other allies doing something similar to you? Like, are there other smaller nonprofits that I know in Colorado we have it, where they're championing a particular stream or a particular mountain or things like that, and learn as much as you can from them, especially as they were kicking off. This second thing that I keyed in on is you said something to the effect of, I'm not quoting you, that the general operating or isn't very sexy. People are geared towards programmatic. That's a huge issue that again takes a mindset shift and how we language it. What we've started languaging it at Global Green Grants Fund is it's flexible support. It's not general operating. What that means for us is, what are the way we make grants is we give large block grants to our regional advisory boards, our thematic advisory boards, 350.org, Rainforest Action Network, and then our global funds like Samdana and Fazol. So when we say, if somebody doesn't restrict, because that's the problem with restricted funds, is it does hamstring an organization that if you're trying to, even though you may have a particular project you're raising money for, it's our job to educate the donor why flexible support is the best way they can support us. It's not for light bulbs. It's not for salaries. It's so that there are no restrictions, that we can put it to the most important area first, and it gives flexibility. And in the larger foundation world, they're understanding that. We've gotten millions of dollars in general support, even though we knew the funder had a particular interest, because we made the case that in our system, that doesn't work as well because it hamstrings us. So I would encourage you to use that terminology, and you can have flexible support, programmatic support, and grant making is the way we do it. So for instance, if we got a restricted grant, 70% we say goes to the actual grant making, 15% goes to programmatic support to support that particular initiative, like women in the environment or gender in the environment. And then 15% is flexible support. And what I say is that's not necessarily not grant money or programmatic money. It's a pool of funds that is not earmarked. And that gives us operating revenue. It gives us flexibility. It makes us be adaptable in these times. So you have to build the case that it isn't just unsexy. It is absolutely critical to have unrestricted support.
You make me think that wouldn't Stephanie and Brooke be able to work that into fee-for-service contract?
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, generally for us, fee for service, you know, the overhead is unrestricted, which is nice.
Okay.
Certainly our labor time and, you know, is covered by, you know, that's not flexible. We work on a project, we only work on the project, but the overhead we pull from that is flexible. So it's
Okay.
just how many of those can you do, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Renee. And you've had success bringing tribal communities together, right? As well, with Cameron's mention about doing that.
Yes, we have. We've worked with a lot of, tribal communities. I would say that you're fairly new, so I guess my suggestion there is patience, because it takes a while to really kind of build those relationships, and yeah, just keep showing up and inviting them, and getting to know them. I think that takes a little bit, but also that is such a great, when you're thinking about fundraising, having that relationship with the tribal communities just really will increase like your chances of fundraising in the future, by building those amazing partnerships. But I was going to say, Death Valley is iconic, right? Like, it's such an amazing place. Like, your story and where you're located and your mission is just so beautiful, right? And so thinking about like an Earth Gives platform, because you're you'll be able to highlight what you do in your organization at a national level, right? And you said, there's 15 people in the town where you're located. I love Death Valley. I think it's awesome. It's such an incredible place. But, Earth Gives allows you, a platform like that. You're able to kind of, not just fundraise at, a national level, but also, you're tapping into learning and growth and other, like-minded professionals and people that, can support and engage with you. And yeah, I think it's just, platforms like that just give you a great opportunity to really get your name out there, because you have people like in Portland that are like, oh my God, Death Valley, like, I would want to support that, right? But you don't know what you don't know. And so I think, kind of thinking about how do you utilize, a platform like Earth Gives to be able to get your mission and your name out there so that you are building awareness around what you do, which will help to kind of bring in those donors.
I would also say that because of what Renee just said about your iconic place, is that there are certain groups that use it, right? They don't live there, but they use it, like runners, adventurers, hikers, different people. And, maybe there's some sort of pathway to building them, whether it's on social media or in other ways, literally reaching out to those groups in some form or fashion to do fundraisers for you. Or like Renee said, you're on the Earth Gives website, platform, and then you invite them to create fundraisers for you off of that. And that way they get to talk and communicate directly to their community of people, but they're a conduit in to your organization. And then maybe you build something from that.
Definitely appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was also wonder, and I don't know if it's because you're too new, but so did I hear that would people drive through to get to Las Vegas? So is there a lot of traffic through there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how long does it take? I've never done this before, but those roadsides that says this is either being cleaned up or supported by Rotary Club or something like that. I wonder if there's a way to tie it into, because then that gives visibility to the sponsor of that, and also you're developing that relationship. So that is just one thing that kind of came to me. I don't know if it's realistic or not, but it's an avenue, especially with things like Rotary clubs or other service organizations that their job is to raise funds and raise awareness of an issue. And then, yes, the fact that you're going for national monument status is that's your key messaging. And given that this current administration is not really moving towards that. And if anything, they might be taking away heritage sites and preservation of natural environments. That is also the urgency of it. What that does also key with everybody on this call is we can't all use the crisis of this administration or that we lost funding because donors get fatigued. So you can't just talk about your need or the lack of funding. You have to emphasize the impact, the positive impact by being part of our community and what your donations or your sponsorships or your grant is doing. Because if you're in that space, there are some urgent needs like death. Like that's why crisis fundraising is very successful when there's famines, when there's wars, when there's fire disasters, avalanches, things like that. I mean, look at the American Red Cross. They've made a whole business out of disaster fundraising, and yet it fatigues donors too. So you have to present it as a long-term goal, not just the urgency of this moment.
I also think just on what you were saying before, Cameron, and kind of following up to Rhonda, what you said as far as like user groups, like peer-to-peer fundraising, I think many times is underutilized, right? And there's such an opportunity there when you connect, with a user group that is really passionate. There's just so much potential there to get, them behind you, right? So using that peer-to-peer model where, you have, say, like a running group or a different kind of conservation group that they're doing a lot of work for you, right? Like sharing your message and getting, highlighting your work and your organization at such a broader level. So I just think that for folks, everyone that's on this call is like really thinking about that peer-to-peer fundraising because it can be very powerful in message sharing and fundraising, but you're also building that network of people who care about what you do. And I think, it's a win-win for
Right.
you and the community.
The
So
technology too, we haven't talked a lot on this call, but when you're a small shop, the fact that AI is getting bigger, the fact that we're purchasing a platform where peer-to-peer is like a touch of a thing. And so I also would look into how technology can help you streamline all of these strategies, especially when you're a small shop. And then I want to get to Courtney wrote in the chat where you're focusing, have a good email list, and you have a healthy major donor program, but you're seeing decreases in your smaller, the smaller donors, the smaller donation size. Okay, so one of the facts of life we're going to have to accept is in our field, it used to be the 80-20 rule. 80% of your funds come from 20% of your donors. Now it could be as high as 98 and 2%. And as much as we don't really love that, the power, dynamic of having large scale donors and things like that, and then especially if you're a grassroots organization, we don't have a large grassroots is in our name, like Global Green Grants Fund is all about grassroots organizing, and yet we have a much healthier major donor with foundations and family foundations and wealthier philanthropists. So I think you have to look at your ROI. If you're spending a lot of time on acquiring rather than retaining, and see why they're not persisting. So a current donor is your best asset, and try to do a lapsed campaign. Before you do acquisition, I would try to do a lapsed donor campaign. And it could be outreach because also people have been given 5 years or more. They're pretty connected to your issue. And if they've lapsed, I would just reach out to them and say, hey, I would just love to know, like, did your priorities change? We're doing a survey right now for our Libunts. That's last year, but unfortunately not this, as opposed to Cybunts, which is some year, but unfortunately not this. And we're going to send out a survey, but we're also then going to call them. And in the survey, we're going to say, I'll reach out to you within a week. So if you don't want to fill out the survey, but want to share, because at least it shows you care, because some people just either they don't see, we don't do a lot of individual fundraising like that. We make 2 appeals a year. Every month, we do not send out a solicitation. People hate that unless they became a monthly donor. Monthly donor sustainer programs is another approach, especially if people want to give larger amounts, but can only afford maybe 10 or 25 or, up to $100, but it all adds up by the end of the year. So there's a lot of data that focusing on your monthly sustainer programs is worthwhile in the long run.
And I know Courtney probably can't ask a question, but what little I know of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and others around the Chesapeake area is that there's a ton of passion. Like a lot of people really care about the area. So it seems to me, not to push against what you're saying, Susan, but the possibilities are there, and maybe it comes in the storytelling of it. So without you being able to ask that question. And Lou made a comment about getting board members on the peer-to-peer, and he's totally right. And what Lou did last year for Earth Gives, forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but you literally set up their peer-to-peer profiles using their emails and creating passwords and saying, here's your thing, go forward and prosper. So sometimes we literally have to handhold and hand it off to people to be champions of that, or like make one up. So like in Cameron's example, he could, just using Earth Gives as an example, he could register for Earth Gives and create a fake fundraiser right now to then share with a hiking group or a triathlete group or whatever, and say, this is how easy it is. And we can just change this for you, and I can hand this off to you and you can help raise money. It takes like 15 minutes maybe to do that. And every peer-to-peer setup is free. So you can do as many as you'd like. So you could have hundreds, if you wanted. That might not make sense to manage, but anyway, that's just an idea.
So can I share another comment about that? Or
Yeah. No, I was just going to open it up and say, what other questions and comments and thoughts and last minute tips and tricks?
So on the thing with boards, you have to set the expectation the minute you start recruiting for those board members, because if their participation financially is important, we have a rule that it's 100% with Pickleball for Good. It's going to be 100% participation. We don't put a minimum. We don't put a maximum. I think that you people have to get to know what their role on the board is. And I do not like using the phraseology, give, get, or get off. I think that's horrible. I do not like it at all. Just like, oh, I'm going to hit them up. Those just not terminology I've ever used in my field. So I think that there are different models which take the burden off. That could be, so for instance, the Benavon model, which I implemented in a couple of different organizations, it used to be called Raising More Money. They're not around anymore, but their model, and I'm happy to talk about it another time, is about doing a free feel-good event where you have table captains. So a board director could be a table captain. It's free to them. They hand them a card. It's a voluntary thing to give. You don't expect them to, but they might. And it's really to engage them in the mission for an hour. It's a 1 hour event. So there's a lot of different, models that tap into that make it easier, because most people hate to ask people for money. They like to share advice, but they don't, and their passions, but they do not like to ask people for money, even if it's something they're really passionate about. And I think that we as the professionals have to help them. We can't expect them to all be, some people sit on the boards because they have competencies. It's not about being the fundraiser person. That's why we oftentimes have fundraising committees. So the people who are really comfortable with it will sit on the committee, not the whole board. So I think we have to take that under consideration too. And how do you keep them on board? How you onboard your board is really important, like keeping them really engaged. So whenever you have a monthly meeting, tell a story. Tell a success story, like really keep them engaged in what you're accomplishing is one way to get them to champion you, because you want them to be the champion of you. I think there was something else, but it's escaping my head right now.
Yeah, no problem. Renee, final thoughts.
Yeah, I was just gonna piggyback a little bit off of what Susan was saying, but I think the more you can bring community into your organization is really, really important. I think, when you're thinking about organizational structure and board recruitment and, folks who lead your organization, I've seen so many organizations, we're recruiting for board members. And I just haven't ever found that very successful. I've had so many times when, people are there because they don't necessarily believe in the mission, or they do, but they don't have the time, and you don't know that until they're 6 months in and they stop showing up. And so I just wanted to, kind of share what's really worked for me for probably 15 years is I bring community members who love the organization and the mission on as a committee member, not a board member, but our committees are filled with just people from the community that love the organization, that have a skill set. And that is the pipeline to the board, right? You have folks that are on committees within the organization. It's kind of like dating for a while, right? You kind of see if they're interested, if they're a good fit, but also, they can decide, like, is this something I want to do? This is like a role and responsibility if I was a board member. And then that they're really committed, and it's just this really beautiful pipeline of getting committed folks, like, to your board of directors. And it's also a great way to bring diverse board members in and like think about your, demographics and composition of your board and organization. Having so many different voices that are different at the table, I think is so important, just makes for a more successful organization. So yeah, community, like as much as you can build community within your organization, everything is going to be better. And you'll be more successful.
Yeah, part of me wants to go, and I use the word community all the time, and I love building community, but it's like sometimes we as fundraisers sitting there and go, tell me what that means. Like, how do I do that? And I'm thinking of something that might be useful for Courtney. So I recently had, well, it was several months ago, but a little kind of reunion gathering of some gals that I know from high school here. And, we all shared kind of what we're up to and all that. And, when they learn more about what I'm doing, they're going, well, we would all give to that. And I'm like, so that's like sitting back here in my head. It's like, how do I like get them into the database, but also then use them in a way that they can bring other people that care about climate and the environment and want to play a role. So kind of piggybacking off of what Renee was saying, to maybe like the individual donors and how you're struggling. And maybe looking at some of the groups like we suggested for Cameron, to also for you, people who, love the Bay and, go out there. Any thoughts, Susan?
Yeah, I was going to say with Courtney's thing, when you have an email list and they haven't converted into donors, I ask myself why. Why do I think that they're not also giving? And one of the things that I've been told in life as a fundraiser is I am completely fearless. I have no fear about asking people about causes that I engage in. And so when people say, well, but they're volunteering and they're giving their time, I stewarded a project for a blood bank. Blood donors are very dedicated donors. They are getting needles stuck in their arm, whether for apheresis or whatever. And I suggested, why not we take those donors, the blood donors, and see if they'd be open to giving financial gifts. Well, there was a big tumult in the organization. I researched it. There were other blood banks, and maybe they got 2 people who said, well, I give blood. Why should I give money? Only 2 people out of everybody. So I feel that either we're not asking them in a way that the message is coming across. There are some people, they think, well, my money can't make a difference. When I see you raising $1 million from somebody, what is my $10 or $25 going to do? So we have to maybe do a pooled strategy. So what I would recommend is, and also being direct with them, say, wow, thank you so much for your letters to the legislature or showing up for our volunteer cleanup or whatever it might be, but do not hesitate to also ask them. You're giving them an opportunity to make a difference in a different way. And whether it's $1 or $10 million or $100 million, we have to just keep asking. And if they're not signing up for it, why do you think they're not? Are we not making it easy for them to do it? Do we give them too much of a pitch? Volunteers know what we do. They're the grassroots frontline people of what we do. So I also come from an attitude of a mindset again. It's my job to ask. It's their job to say no, not now, or yes, or maybe. I got to check with somebody. So never be afraid to ask people who are volunteers or are doing other things. And that's actually a way that you engage your donors. Like a Green Grants is not much you can do. We're not a political organization. So, our engagement is very different than a trip like an Amnesty International or Greenpeace. So we've had to raise money from individuals differently. There's not a way that they can do much other than introducing to each other, reposting our social media, doing a fundraiser or an online fundraiser, which I did, pretty successfully with somebody who now is a multi-year donor. So that's the other thing I was going to say.
Great final thoughts. Well, we've run over time, and hopefully we're all filled with some ideas that we can take action on. I know Renee and Susan have been super generous in answering others' questions. So if anyone does have additional questions, one time I had to let the Zoom just run and step away while Susan coached another nonprofit, a very, small, tiny startup. And I just like, okay, you two are at it. I've got to go do some other things. So I know their generosity is very much there. So let me know if you have questions for them. And we wish you all great luck and invite you to be part of Earth Gives 2025. Registration is open for nonprofits right now. And we're going to be ramping up, making phone calls all across the country to recruit more of you. And we're building partnerships and all kinds of collaborations to build that community of Earth Givers everywhere and near term and far. So thank you for everything that you do, because you all are making a difference, and I really appreciate getting to know you and welcoming you to these gatherings. And thank you to Renee and Susan. Yay!
Happy to answer any questions or take a deep dive into any of these topics with folks.
And I'm
So-
happy to stay on for a few more minutes, because there was